Well, hello there, dear viewers. Today, we have a little information about an all-time classic Batman storyline that has become slightly forgotten. So, to avoid any sort of spoilers, let's just get right into Batman Faces, Comic Explored. I'm Andrew LaPomardo, your narrator, and this is Marvelous Videos. The Batman Faces is a storyline from the comic book series Batman Legends of the Dark Knight. It was written and illustrated by Matt Wagner. It was published in 1995. Interestingly, this comic is one of the first Batman comics with this kind of open violence and gore. It is pretty refreshing to see. Let us go to the beginning. It all started when Harvey Dent managed to anger Gotham City mob boss Salvatore Maroni. It resulted in the left side of his face being damaged by acid during a court hearing. The acid somehow manages to disrupt his brain functioning as well, turning him into Two-Face, as we know him now. In the beginning, he has Batman as an ally. Still in his early years as a crime fighter, Batman seeks to save his pal from a downward spiral of tragedy. Two-Face, however, seems to have no desire to change as the story progresses, and the two end up as enemies. This comic follows Two-Face and Batman as Two-Face tries to build a new nation by buying an island. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you very much. Let's begin. Face your fears. The scene is set. We are at Arkham Asylum. Harvey Dent flips a coin and loses himself. The coin flip seems like a symbolic gesture to show the flip between Harvey and Two-Face. The scene cuts to Jim Gordon telling Batman about the murder and Harvey's escape at 2:22 a.m. Which means it's not Harvey we're after, Gordon says. And Batman adds, he's Two-Face again. The continuity breaks and we move 2 years, 2 months, 2 weeks, and 2 days ahead in time from the night of the escape. Batman is at a masquerade party at the French consulate. Nelson Wren introduces Bruce and Mr. d'Urberville to each other. The reasons why Bruce wants an island of his own are unknown. He claims it is for privacy, but who knows? The deal gets sealed in a couple of minutes, and the island is sold for $30 million. Later in the evening, the beautiful French lady, Manon Barbe, comes up to Nelson Wren. She is quite obviously using him for information as Matt Wagner plays up the stereotypes of the femme fatale and the one who falls for her. While she is reeling him in, a murder happens back at the party. A plastic surgeon has died. His mask has been rigged with a slow-release molecular acid that bonded the mask to his flesh. It was a brutal and slow death, which, according to Batman, was just a diversion. There was a jade yin-yang that was to be installed at the Gotham Museum that night. Batman's hunch led him there, and it proved to be right. Harvey and his henchmen were stealing the disc. The henchmen used the massive jade disc as a battering ram against Batman, knocking him aside and completely numbing his arm as they fled with their prize. Never say that the villains don't win. Meanwhile, Nelson Wren is still reeling from his encounter with Manon, which went very well. They decided to meet again 2 nights later on the terrace of Excelsior Hotel at 8 o'clock. He then receives a mysterious, disguised visitor who claims to be very interested in Wayne and d'Urberville's deal. The visitor also has a French accent and offers to give $10 million more than the offer provided by Bruce Wayne. He claims that Wren will be greatly rewarded for his work. After he leaves, we are left wondering who this enigmatic masked man is. A man whose left eye we never get to see. I suppose it's not entirely apparent, since one could be fooled into thinking that it's not Two-Face because his word balloons aren't scratchy and horrific like they were during the robbery. But if it's Harvey, does that mean his good side is pretending to be a masked Frenchman while his bad side takes over the openly Two-Face stuff? That's duality, in my opinion, but both sides seem to be working towards the same evil goal. So perhaps calling it duplicity is more appropriate. After the visit, Ren goes to Bruce Wayne's house to let him know about the new buyer. He asks Ren to set up a meeting with Mr. Paul d'Urberville at 1 p.m. the next day. They meet at the running tracks, and Bruce offers to go higher if they need be. Again, within a couple of minutes, they finalize the deal. Paul gets $50 million with a 25% down payment effective immediately, while Bruce gets his private island. The panels change, and Ren goes on his date with Manon. She admits that she will have to travel to France soon with her cousin, a fellow realtor. Before leaving, Ren encounters this cousin Javier himself, albeit briefly and only from the neck up. We see that cousin Javier doesn't have legs in the following panels, but the large picture is still unclear to the audience. What I love in these panels is how it depicts Ren as a very small man caught up in a very large scheme that will soon overwhelm him. Still, he's too greedy and motivated by sexual desires to notice. Needless to say, this is where Ren makes his biggest blunder. Being sucked into Harvey's scheme with the promise of Manon's affections was one thing, but as Martin Prince's father said, "You got greedy, Nelson." Batman, meanwhile, is on the lookout for the next victim. He goes to save Charles Arneson, another plastic surgeon, who was celebrating his anniversary at the opera. Harvey is a deeply conflicted man. One half of him loves chaos while the other hates it. Unfortunately, Batman isn't able to save the doctor, but he does go after the killer and manages to catch him. Detective Jim Gordon shows up, and Batman requests him to let him interrogate the killer. Needless to say, it is a violent interrogation. Turns out, the killer met Two-Face in France. On the other hand, Ren gets another visit by the anonymous buyer. He tells the buyer that he wants 25% of Wayne's bid, which is $12.5 million. The Frenchman agrees to it and tells Ren that he will pursue Mr. d'Urberville on his own. Batman figs around the French angle and finds out that Two-Face has been finding and capturing more people like him, the deformed and disabled. Wagner brings in the point of view of Two-Face here. He talks to his little group and addresses their shared dream of refuge, a place where they can break away from society's prying eyes, and their obsession with perfection. I know that Two-Face is a villain, but when he talks about the injustice faced by people who are different, it seems to make sense. There is an obsession with perfection and beauty in the world, which creates insecurities in people. While disabled people are completely capable of living wonderful and fulfilling lives, I can understand the need to get away from mainstream society and find solitude in others like themselves. Batman is on the prowl to save the next victim, Everett Baker, a plastic surgeon with a twin brother. He got the police to tail the twins while he kept a lookout at their house. He had double-checked everything. Dr. Baker had a little brandy and a cigar before bed. Nothing really unusual for him. Well, until his face exploded. Batman couldn't believe his eyes. He had checked the humidor. Two-Face had put a slow-acting poison in Dr. Baker's food, which relaxed his upper bowel so much that the methane was leaking up his body. The cigar caused an internal explosion, but he would have died in his sleep anyway. A clever double-stage killing on Harvey's part. While Batman was focused on his failures to save lives, Two-Face had sent cousin Javier, the man with no legs, to spy on Paul d'Urberville to find blackmail-worthy information. The next day, Wayne and d'Urberville's deal proceeds as planned, with Wayne making his down payment of $10 million. By nighttime, Batman finally saves one of the plastic surgeons, Charles Kepler, by following his instincts. Around the same time, Paul d'Urberville receives an unwelcome visitor. Following the visit, d'Urberville vanishes from public view, as does Wayne's down payment, which naturally raises Bruce's suspicions. Meanwhile, Ren relays Bruce's down payment bank transaction number to France. Harvey, in turn, sends Manon over to thank Ren for his loyal service all night long. Later, he calls the French consulate and learns that there is no Comte de la Annonce. He begins to suspect that something's wrong here. After hours of driving around in a haze of worry, he tracks down Manon and demands that she tells him the truth. Manon mercifully just shoots Ren, rather than torturing us with more French-accented dialogues. She gave Wren a whiff of a sweet, sweet tranquilizer dart. Given what lies ahead of him, a bullet might have been better. D'Urberville, now a miserable shell of his usual dashing self, begs Bruce to not fight the bid, and admits to being blackmailed by someone calling himself Count Anant. Say it out loud, which is exactly the kind of puns that work best in comics. Bruce then discovers that a pilot was kidnapped at the same time he rescued the one plastic surgeon. The pilot was supposed to fly the first transatlantic dirigible flight in over 75 years. The Goth Zeppelin, which is what Harvey thought to use in order to get to the Isle d'Urberville. Bruce goes to the hangar where the Goth Zeppelin is kept, only to end up getting knocked out. We see him tied up while Two-Face taunts him. He doesn't attack Batman though, which is interesting, considering he's the only person standing in his way to getting the island. However, if we look at it, Harvey isn't after Batman at all in this. He is only concerned with the island and wants a safe space for those who are different. On the other hand, Nelson Wren wakes up inside Harvey's funhouse and realizes that he's been duped. Harvey thanks him for the large down payment, then gloats, you cannot distinguish a real French accent from a fake one, but we're still lost to its charming allure. As if this revelation wasn't enough of a shock, Manon visits Wren, and she bemoans the fact that he only loved her form and face without ever truly knowing her. So, she shows him the real Manon. Full beard and breast. He tries to run away from reality until he is conked on the head and put in a room with Mr. D'Urberville. D'Urberville is upset with Wren, and rightfully so. Wren was the reason that D'Urberville's well-kept secret got revealed. Paul D'Urberville, you see, is also a deformed man. He has 2 extra arms protruding from his stomach that he and his parents have tried very hard to keep hidden. This says more about the society they are in than the actions of the D'Urbervilles, in my opinion. They are in a world that is more concerned with appearances, where they have to save face rather than be themselves. This is where Wagner starts building up to the crux of the story. Meanwhile, Batman has escaped from Harvey's clutches and come to save D'Urberville and Wren. Unfortunately, he messes up and gets captured by Two-Face once again. D'Urberville is stowed away safely, but the same allowances aren't given to Batman and Wren. Two-Face flips a coin to decide which one to kill. Unfortunately for Wren, the fates were not on his side. He is pushed out of the plane into his death, while Batman has somehow managed to free himself once again. He reminds Harvey of the innocent people he has killed, to which he retaliates, beauty merchants, all. He deeply seems to believe that his people suffer as much as he does. He claims that it is imperative for them to have a space isolated from the rest of society. However, his people, as he calls them, disagree. Turns out, a lot of them were not here willingly. He said he'd kill me if I didn't cooperate. He said he'd kill my children. These are the statements they said. Two-Face revealed in this scene to be a fanatical hypocrite who does not speak for his people, but rather a villain who will force those he claims to protect to obey his whims. Any notions of him being a Magneto-style noble villain have been dashed, and now he has been revealed. All that remains is for Harvey to face the truth about himself. Most of them enjoyed their individual lives, while few had terrible experiences. Harvey makes a break for it and ends up at a circus. The entire thing is quite strategic and brings the comic to a wonderful close. The circus has a performer who is a man with 2 faces as well, except he has a biological deformity, unlike Harvey. The man with 2 faces starts to condemn Harvey, who keeps believing that the other man hasn't suffered the way he has. He claims that their pain is different, and society perceives them differently. While Harvey has a long and illustrious history of epic meltdowns, this one may be the most emotionally charged. It's a scathing indictment of the character, slicing him to the core and exposing all the ways in which Two-Face has been deluding himself. Even with the scarring, he could have led a normal life. But he chose to become a bitter criminal instead. It's the ugliest, most painful truth he could face. And it breaks him down so badly that he's almost ready to defy the coin and shoot anyway, even though his good side is screaming at the time. Marvelous verdict? Batman Faces is a comic with only the best things nestled in its core. Maybe others won't agree with Batman when he says that Harvey was looking for justice in his own twisted way, but I do. It is a rather poetic and deep-rooted feeling of insecurity in Harvey that we explore in this comic. I think his intentions started altruistically, but got mangled into selfishness in between when he found out that others like him are living happy and fulfilling lives. The marvelous verdict is that Batman Faces is most definitely worth a read, and even better for contemplation. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks, everyone.